Hello and welcome back to the Going to IEU podcast. Today we have a very special guest, my good friend and Bachelor of Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence student, Dyanna Rivera. Dyanna, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Nick. Thanks for having me.
So, tell us a little about yourself. You know, where you're from, where you've lived.
Yeah, sure. So I am actually from Seattle, Washington originally. Love it. Definitely, I think it shows a lot in my style. It's got like a very grungy hipster vibe. So a lot of people actually mistake me for being a communication student at first. But yeah, I'm originally from Seattle, and I grew up there. I was born in that same area, and so I brought a lot of that culture with me when I came to Madrid. But I actually started off in Segovia, so I got a nice blend of like the really small town vibe as well as the really big metropolitan vibe that you get from Madrid. So it's been pretty nice.
So why did you decide to study computer science?
It was actually quite a different path than a lot of people take to it. Most people, they just do their own coding projects and they get into it, or they start by making modifications to like Minecraft or something. And for me, it was some kid in my junior year of high school, I think, was in robotics club, and I thought he was like the coolest person ever. So at the time, I was super into the visual arts, but I was getting kind of dissatisfied with it. So I asked him about getting into tech, and he gave me some pointers on it, and I just became fascinated by it. So self-taught myself a little bit of coding from there, but most of it was really just me reading up on articles about like how data analysis is applied, and especially looking at the climate change crisis, like seeing all the technology that's being developed for different areas. It was fascinating to me, and I wanted to be behind that because I just thought the massive exchange of information, like for me, it gets me super excited. I know it sounds very nerdy, but it's totally up my area. So
that is super exciting. So what made you come to IE for this?
Well, with IE, the really cool thing is I found that you get a lot of practical experience on top of the theory, which you don't find at a lot of other universities. So one thing that's been really big for me was we have I think it's known as like the Pier 17 project, and within the degree we call it the TRL stages because it's modeled off of NASA's TRL phases that they use when they develop new technologies. And so the idea is when you're developing a new technology, there's several different phases you have to go through, from the initial ideation stages to the research and development and then the actual implementations. And so with that, what you get to do is you basically start your capstone project from first year, which sounds super intimidating, but we just start brainstorming our ideas. And then by basically the end of our fourth year, we have this prototype figured out of a real world project that we could market and apply. And I think for me, that was one of the biggest selling points when I came here. And so far, it's been a wild ride with it, but it also gives you really great industry connections, which, again, you won't find hardly anywhere else. So I think for anybody who really wants to get involved with both the technological as well as the business aspects of it, it's a great opportunity.
So can you run us through what your Pier 17 project is?
Yeah. So for me, I got really into, not into, but like I got super fascinated by how technology was being applied in the medical sector. After my first year, I saw a couple guest speakers who came here. And so over the summer, because I actually failed my first TRL the first go around, so I had to resubmit my proposal my second year. But when I was kind of revamping the whole idea, I actually went down this rabbit hole of neurology and Alzheimer's research. And it turns out there's a lot of AI that's being applied into neurological research to kind of streamline the diagnostic process. And so right now what I'm looking at is, from that research, I've been trying to put the pieces together to get a tool figured out that would basically alert doctors in the early stages if someone shows like some kind of abnormality. So the idea is you would get like a small mic or something, and the doctor would give it to you during your checkup, and you would just give them like a small voice sample so they would tell you to say a certain thing. So you could tell them like, oh, I had eggs and toast for breakfast. And the idea is this algorithm would pick up on small details that the human ear might not detect right away. And these details could indicate abnormalities that could apply to a range of different diseases or disorders. So it doesn't necessarily have to be Alzheimer's. It could be Parkinson's. It could be depression, anxiety, a speech impediment. But the idea is that it gives doctors an insight early on into, hey, like, there might be a problem present here. We should maybe think about getting a referral done. Because early diagnosis is huge, especially with a lot of these, when you're talking about like degenerative stuff. So,
wow,
that's
fascinating.
The idea. Yeah.
So, the doctors will be getting these cues entirely from somebody's voice.
Yeah, I'm not going to go into all the technical aspects of it because there's a lot of jargon, but basically what the computer would do is you would take in a person's audio and you just get like this spectrogram file or, there's like Mel frequency graphs as well that are even more insightful. And it just tells you like stuff about the person's pacing, their tone of voice over time. And it does it at like a micro level. So when you hear it, you can hear like if someone's speaking quietly or not, but you're not going to hear it immediately when it changes, and with this algorithm, that like the different algorithms that are going to go into it for the program, it would chunk up the speech. So you could also detect like, oh, there was some weird spacing going on here, or there was stuttering that is not normal, because of course in machine learning you always split your data into either a training set or a test set, and so the training set is going to act as like the baseline for here's like what's normal and what's not normal. So the idea is like, yeah, you're going to have people who talk. And of course, for instance, even just now, like I've had my filler words or I've had, maybe spots where I've stuttered or stalled a bit. And that's normal. But the program itself would be able to detect like when this happens at a frequency that's not normal, that a person might not notice until other symptoms are present. And that's when usually there's a more severe problem that's going to take a longer time to treat. And so that's the idea behind it.
That sounds like a beautiful concept.
Thank you.
Let's backtrack a bit and talk about the transition to IE and also from Segovia, which obviously is essentially a little village, to the metropolitan Madrid.
Yeah. So Segovia was a time. I got here actually in the middle of COVID, so things were just barely starting to improve. And on top of that, I actually got here quite late because my visa was delayed massively. So I got here right before Christmas. Christmas break came into swing, and so Segovia itself was just it was really eerie. It was like this ghost town. I think I met you around that time, and we can both attest to that.
Yeah, it was definitely a bit strange.
There was a point where I walked out of the house and I was like, I'm just gonna start going on jogs. I'm gonna like start my fitness journey. It's New Year's resolution time, and so I walked out and I found Nick at like 8:30, but the streets were just empty entirely. And he's like, "What are you doing here?"
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too because the demographic breakdown of that city, especially where a lot of the students live, is basically, pretty old people and students.
Yeah.
It's college students, which is probably the most terrible COVID combination that, you could think of.
Oh, absolutely. And then on top of that, like, I mean, you stick out, like something a lot of people mentioned is you stick out like a sore thumb if you go to IE because you have people from such different international backgrounds that the style is different, the way we talk and the way we sound is different. Like I'm half Mexican, but because I grew up in the US my whole life, like I have this really weird accent in Spanish that in Madrid, like people don't make such a big deal out of it because it's a more of an international community. But in Segovia, like I would talk to people and immediately I would get glared at or something. It's like, yeah, tourist, or like you're just one of those IE people. But generally, like once people got to know you a bit better, like they were of course kinder. But yeah, Segovia, the nice thing I liked about it though was once I did get there, I was really nervous about making friends and getting a community established because for me, moving to IE entailed leaving everything I knew behind. Like I had no community in Spain, nobody that I really knew going to IE except for a couple of folks I'd met over Slack when we initially got admitted. So once I got here, though, I found that even over break, while people were kind of all over the place because some folks were able to go back home, I actually made some very good friends and actually met one of my very best friends over that winter break, and we're still talk like every day now, and yeah, it's been really good. So I think being so close knit to each other geographically had its advantages for sure. But when I did get a chance to move out, I was really excited because after a year, I went a little bit stir crazy.
Yeah, I agree. I think 2 years in Segovia is probably the perfect amount.
Yeah, I would say 1 to 2 years, but definitely, like, I'm very grateful I did start because you also get so much history out of it that you wouldn't think of otherwise. Like, there's the Alcazar and the aqueduct and stuff, which is just, it's gorgeous to see. So
yeah. So aside from obviously this incredibly complex machine learning project that you're taking on, what are your hobbies and what are you up to in your free time?
Yeah, so I'm kind of just this jack of all trades. I do a lot of writing in my free time, which you probably know about because I did some work with a former project called The Avant-Garde my first year, where I did a lot of nonfiction pieces just kind of touching base on all sorts of topics from like technological phenomena to cultural stuff and underrepresented minorities in history. Like I don't remember what the occasion was, but I did an article on Ada Lovelace and her impact on computer science. She was actually the first person to really develop like a programmable language for a computer. So that was really cool. Hashtag women in STEM. But
yeah.
But, I do write a lot in my free time, even, outside of projects that I've done. And so it's pretty personal stuff that I do. I don't really share it openly, but sometimes I'll do photography. Recently, I have gotten more, like I said, I've gotten more into like walking and running. So especially when it's like crunch time for tests and stuff, I'll just like walk around my block, and I live in pretty close to the center, so it's a really nice area to just get out and like you can go take a jog if it's late enough or early enough in the morning and it's not too crowded, or even just walk around, and it's a super super nice de-stressor. Really into reading, and then of course like now that COVID is lightening up a bit, clubs and stuff are back open, so if I'm able to over the weekend, like I definitely go out with some friends and just have some fun and go dancing, listen to some techno music. So, yeah.
Nice. So, by the way, I love the Ada Lovelace article.
Thank you. It's actually one of my favorite pieces I've written. So
yeah, it was very nice. So speaking of that, women in STEM. How is it being a woman in STEM?
It's like being any other person in STEM, to put it quite bluntly. But you do notice some stuff, and I think a lot of the women who I've talked to who are in STEM fields have also noticed it. Like at IE, we're very fortunate that diversity isn't so much of an issue. Like for me, I've got, I'm a woman, but then I'm also like the only gay person that I know of in my degree. So there's also that aspect. I always joke with people. I'm like, yeah, I'm like the the diversity quotient all rolled into one. But there's certain differences you notice, but again, it's just, at IE at least, you don't really have to work harder necessarily. Like people treat you generally the same, regardless of the demographic. However, when it comes to outside of IE, that's when things get a little bit different. So I know in high school, I was probably one of like 3 girls, I think, in my computer science class. It was like my first ever coding class, and it was a class of about 25 people. And so it was super, super intimidating going in because, like, obviously I don't judge my friends based on their gender or whatever when I make them, but it's really strange trying to go in and you've just got all these dude bros who've been coding since they were like 8 years old, and they're like, yeah, I know C# and and Python and everything, and I'm like, I kind of know how to put together a web page, So I think that's actually been something that's a big barrier to a lot of women when they try to get into STEM. And so I support all the initiatives to get women into STEM because I think that there's a lack of marketing towards it, or at least historically there has been. But at the same time, like, I don't think that we should be treated any differently because at the end of the day, we're people, just like anybody else. And that goes, like I said, for any other minority. I think the way to get increased diversity in the field is to just allow those doors to be opened and remove your own biases from it, because that's ultimately where problems do start to happen. And like I said, at IE, fortunately, those biases don't exist as much. In my class, I do think there are only 6 girls out of the 34 of us, but that is just due to interest in the degree itself, and the most recent intake. So our current first years, I believe about half the degree is actually women. So there is a lot of increased diversity that's happening, which is really cool to see.
So with regards to transitioning into the industry, what are you looking forward to doing? Do you have any plans for the future after graduating? Are you looking at any particular subsector of computer science or AI?
Yeah, so it's been anything but a linear path. Like I said, going into it for me, it was just kind of trying things out, and I just landed on computer science. And then looking at the career, it's looking like it's about the same thing. I found that the projects I was most passionate about within my degree had to do with data analytics and machine learning. So right now, I'm getting started with some opportunities with machine learning, both through Pier 17 and then with internships, just lining those up for the summer next year. And we're just going to see where that takes me. But right now, it's like I could go on and on and on about it. It's just, it has my heart. Absolutely. I think it's super cool, and there's so many applications to it that you can say that machine learning is a niche, but there's like several sub niches within it. So I'm personally most interested in how it's applied to medicine as well as fintech. Like the whole world of online banking and cryptocurrency is also pretty cool. So just kind of looking at that and exploring and seeing where it takes me.
Are there any particular problems within those fields that you'd like to see machine learning solve in the future, even if they might be abstract or perhaps too difficult for the time being?
Yeah. So the biggest problem, and this can be applied to both fintech and the medical sector, is ensuring A, consumer trust, but also B, privacy. And I think the consumer trust comes as a result of the privacy. And right now, like people who work directly with technology, we don't have as much of a problem with it because we are familiar with the software involved, and kind of like all the encryption processes and everything. But I think a big barrier for people transitioning to more technological solutions when it comes to both medicine and fintech is they're thinking, well, this is like my really sensitive data. Why would I want to give that to a machine? Because there's a very human aspect to both of those industries, and you can't disregard that even as a software developer. And so I would say the best solution to that might not even lie in the technology, but the marketing. So being able to have a good grasp of that, even as a developer going into it, and knowing, yes, the possibilities are endless, but you need to also make sure that you're working along a timeline that's going to work well with your consumer, because otherwise it's useless. Like if people don't want to use your solutions, then you're not going to go anywhere with it. So I think with time it will come. Right now we're kind of like at the top of the hype curve. So I think as things start to mellow down and people start to see it slowly more integrated, they're going to see it's not all as big and scary as some sci-fi movies would make it out to be. So it's closer than we would think.
So how do you think you guys as computer scientists are going to be able to quell this distrust within the consumer population? Is it going to be on the marketing side on your end, or is it going to be on the technological literacy side of the consumer end, or is it going to be an interplay of both?
With that, and I'm so happy you asked me about this, I think it's a highly interdisciplinary issue. It can't just lie on one team or one sector. And so I'm a firm believer in, if you're working, regardless of which team you're working on in a business, you need both the technological literacy, but you also need the really good people skills, because the real value in a data scientist or an engineer especially comes with someone who can get the right numbers, but also someone who can communicate them effectively to both people on their team who are going to understand all the complicated stuff, and people who are just on marketing or, advertising or whatever, that have no clue what's going on in the back end. Because that transparency ultimately is what's going to cross between industries and make it to the consumer and get them to understand exactly what's happening. And I think transparency, just like with any other issue, is the biggest factor, if we're just talking generally, to getting people to trust it. Because if a company is fully transparent about what's happening, then there's no questions on the consumer's end. And if there are, they feel like they have that space to discuss with support or whoever is in charge of that.
Fascinating. So, disclaimer, I'm not a computer scientist. I'm learning Python right now, but very
good
slowly.
For you.
Yeah, at my own pace.
Python's a good start.
Yeah. So, if my questions related to the tech are, how do you say, what would the word be? Phrased wrongly, or I use some terms that maybe aren't the, technologically that aren't up to the jargon.
Chill. I'm not gonna grill you and be like, Nick, you're so stupid.
Yeah. Okay. So you talk about transparency and how it's important for you guys as computer scientists to put that across to the consumers. But is there an issue? Because I've heard from the computer scientists and programmers that I've listened to on podcasts or I've read things about, that there's sort of an issue, like a black box issue, where they're not entirely sure perhaps how their algorithms are making these decisions. Like they have the base sort of fundamentals, but where does that play into all of this?
Yeah, there is absolutely a black box issue. And so let me think about it for a second. So to phrase it in like the most easily digestible way possible, when you develop a program, you don't just go straight to coding. Don't ever do that. But what you actually do is you look at the problem that you have on hand and you just start writing down the steps of the solution. It's like, it's so much planning before you go into it. And so we like to call it writing down pseudocode. And basically we just go, okay, so this is what we need to make the program work, and this is the problem we're trying to solve. And then you just everyone has their own thought process to get down to the details. But with more complex problems, so for example, my project for the Pier 17, like what I had to do was, because this is something that's going to involve so many different algorithms and there is that black box issue with it, is I needed to chunk it down into even smaller parts. So I was like, okay, so, for like analyzing the tone and the speed of the speech, I'm going to need to use a different algorithm than the one that's actually going to analyze the words and the meaning of the speech. And so you have to pull apart all these different pieces. But even then, there are some algorithms that are just established that you're going to be integrating as kind of a piece of this overall puzzle. And they can be quite difficult to understand. So I think it's more of a black box for the people looking from the outside in, because as a programmer, your job is to understand in depth what exactly you're doing with these, because you are coding it. So I don't think when they say that there's a black box issue, it's not like we don't understand it, because we do. There's so much research that goes into it in the planning. I don't see how you wouldn't understand it, but it gets so nuanced and so into the fine details that it becomes a black box for anyone looking from the outside. So again, it just comes back to that communication and transparency issue, where there's that whole saying of like a good teacher is someone who can explain a topic well on various levels. If you are truly an expert and knowledgeable on a certain subject or on a certain program, and you know it like the back of your hand, and you can communicate well, that's such a powerful combination, because then you can kind of start to remedy that black box issue and be able to explain to people what exactly is happening. So, I mean, the reality is not everyone is going to be able to understand every single line of code, but as long as they get the gist of it, I think, you can at least help things be a little bit easier for the public.
So before we hop into our brand new segment, let's get back to the IE talk. What would you tell future IE students that are coming in to study computer science? Any recommendations for them or suggestions, insights? Yeah,
so the first thing I would say, and it's going to sound like a lot of tough love because it is, but if you think you know how to study, you probably don't. And I came across this as a very, very harsh reality when I started uni, because, I mean, My background in high school, I was the kid. We didn't have IB at my high school. I came from the American like AP system, and so I was the kid who took all the AP classes. I get kind of irritated with past me because I'm like, girl, like you're stressing yourself over nothing at 16. But I was just trying to do all this because I thought it would prepare me to study better for college, and the reality is it didn't, because once I got to uni, I realized that your study methods are going to be highly dependent on how you learn, but also highly dependent on what subject you're studying for. So, for example, my coding classes, you can't study for that the same way a law student would study for their property law exam. So what I would recommend is whenever you are presented with any kind of math classes or programming classes, the best way to actually get good at it is to let yourself be terrible at it at first. And it's a huge punch to the ego when you're in your first year, but it's very necessary. Because once you give yourself the space to actually work through some problems and just feel completely stupid, let your self-confidence get a little bit demolished, you can then look at it critically and start to learn from those mistakes. And that's going to teach you so much more than any lecture is going to. And the professors, if they see you doing that, they actually get quite impressed, because a lot of people don't take the extra time to do that. So kudos to you. But I think, I think if somebody had told me that from the get-go, I would have saved a lot of time and energy, especially because COVID was a thing. So making study groups was a bit difficult, but that's also another helpful thing. If you're a very social person like me and you do well with studying with others, then study groups can also be a good motivator, especially when finals and midterms come up and everyone is just a little bit burnt out. But, there's that piece of advice. And then outside of it, just chill a little bit for your first year. There's a lot of people who go into it and they're really stressed out that there's a lot of unfamiliarity and there's a lot of transition, and especially if they're moving to a different country, there's a lot going on, and that is true. But it works out. You learn how to go with the flow, and I think Spanish culture also kind of integrates that into you. Like, not everything is as serious as you might make it out to be for yourself. Like, do take things seriously, but also understand that life is not a black and white thing. Just because you failed at one thing does not mean that you are a failure, or just because you succeeded at one thing does not mean that you're going to be successful at everything. So, just a lot of life lessons, but that's my piece of wisdom.
Very wise. I definitely can take from that, transition from, the American live to work philosophy over to the work to live.
Don't even get me started with it.
Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our new segment called, tentatively, If Yes, When, where I will be asking Dyanna some questions, and she's going to tell me if the answer is yes, when. When is this going to take place? Are you ready?
Absolutely.
And they will be centered around artificial intelligence. Everything from the more, the extremely general to the kind of more specific, but I can only get so specific. I'm not going to ask you, what type of algorithms you're using.
No, you're good. You're good.
Like that. Okay. I actually didn't brief you on this first question that I'm going to do.
Okay. Hit me.
If yes, when? Artificial general intelligence that can think like a human.
Yes, but I don't have an exact time frame. I would say 50 plus years. Like, it's not anywhere close to us. And I mean, if you want me to go into a more detailed explanation, it's just the AI that we have now, like, everyone looks at it and they're like, oh, it's almost like magic. So like your Spotify recommendation system, you open it and there's so many memes about how Spotify fans, and I'm bringing some bias into it because I personally love Spotify, but
me too.
Some people, you're on the right team then. But some people who are really into Spotify, like, they will make fun of it and say, yeah, Spotify is like having your personal butler for your music, whereas Apple Music just gives you a library or something. And so this isn't promoted by Spotify, by the way, but
that may not be true. I think we're receiving a lot of sponsor offers.
But with Spotify, like, it's actually not a very complicated system that they have employed. But at the same time, like, that's all it does is it recommends stuff. That's the only purpose it serves. It's not as intelligent as a person would be when it comes to new music. So sometimes a problem that I encounter with it is I get into this rabbit hole of just kind of the same stuff that I listen to that, I want something different, but Spotify's like, no, this is the stuff you like, so this is what I'm going to spit out to you. And so, whereas if I were to talk to a person, they would be able to give me purely organic stuff that's outside of the range of just general stuff that I've listened to. And when we're talking about personal assistants and stuff, I mean, you have Siri, and Siri can make jokes with you, but you get to a certain point with Siri where you realize that she only has so many jokes that she can tell you, or so many topics that she can kind of organically produce. And I say organically in quotes because, of course, it's not. But it's, it's all just engineered to make it seem like it has its own mind, but it really doesn't. And so in order to get to that, you would have to take in so many different factors into account, such as how a person expresses themselves individually, which involves the personality traits of someone. And then, depending on whether this is a virtual assistant or it's a recommendation system or whatever, you'd have to go into like all the different nuances that make a human interaction so intelligent. And so, yeah, to just put it in summary, like there's a lot of details that get overlooked. And right now, it's incredible what we can do with AI, but it's purely functional. Like I don't think it's ever gonna replace like emotionally talking to a real live breathing person. So
you destroyed my dreams. I love the movie.
Sorry.
I love the movie Her with Joaquin Phoenix.
You and me both. Sorry, but yeah, I don't see that happening anytime soon. I do think it's possible though. Like I said, there's a lot of really incredible stuff, a lot of really cool research, but we are like in the baby step phases of it. So
okay. So deepfake FaceTime scams. If yes, when? And if you can, how?
Yes. And
it can be more theoretical, obviously.
Yeah. I want to say probably within the next 10 years or so. My knee-jerk reaction was to say 20 years because I get really freaked out by deepfakes. But they've done so much progress with them. I would not be surprised to see that being something integrated into FaceTime in the next decade easily. And that's because with deepfakes, they already, like I said, the technology is already out there to produce deepfakes. For anybody who's listening that is familiar with the more techie stuff, they use some algorithms called CNNs, and they basically mimic the way that the human brain processes images. It's really cool. But, I think you and me both have seen those examples of like different politicians talking, and it's just a deep fake, and it kind of gives you that uncanny valley because part of you knows that it's not a real person, but it looks real. And so to make that a filter, I don't think would be too difficult. I've never made a filter myself, but I know a lot of people who have. And if an undergrad student can easily make a filter and there's already this deepfake technology that's out there, once deepfakes become more popular, which I'm sure they will very soon, I don't see a future where they're not somehow integrated. And this is where I do get a little bit concerned because I hope, of course, with like if it's just some kid using a dumb Snapchat filter, it's not going to be as real of a concern. But I do hope that legislation globally catches up to it sooner rather than later, because there's a lot of ways that this could go really awry, just in terms of like impersonation and that kind of thing. So it's not something to be afraid of, but use it with caution, kind of like the Force. Like it's something to be used with responsibility. So
you don't want to join the dark side.
No, absolutely not.
Interesting. Okay, next question. Most people losing their jobs to AI, and I specifically want you to tackle the unskilled labor aspect of this, because obviously that does make up a significant portion of the jobs out there. And what will that transition look like? So if yes, when?
Yes, with an asterisk. And again, within the next decade.
Decade, really?
Yeah, I don't think it's not going to be like overnight, but there's a reason I put an asterisk there, so don't freak out. But like, it's
No, we just get to kick back and philosophize all day.
I wish, but rent still needs to get paid. So I think
UBI.
I think what will happen is don't think of it so much as people losing their jobs, because yes, there will be jobs that are changing, but there are also going to be jobs that are being created as those jobs are getting lost. And so I don't think, and I'm saying this as someone who comes from a family and a community where there are lots of people who are dubbed like unskilled workers. I started out as one myself, and like there is a lot of technological advancement happening there. And already you see, I mean, I think Madrid is even more advanced than Seattle on this, which Seattle catch up. But, you know, you see like the checkout stands, like if you go I went into to Decathlon a couple weeks ago, and I was expecting like, yeah, there's a self-checkout, but I'm going to at least have to scan my stuff. And instead, like I could just drop my clothes in and it just automatically somehow like calculated the price. I don't know how that works. But there was just one person there supervising it. And of course, it automates the whole process and it makes it easier. But like you said, there are people who are losing jobs because you don't have like 10 cashiers operating the whole thing. And so it does look grim when you think about it in that way. But at the same time, when you are able to go through all this automation and kind of make things more efficiently, people are able to focus on things that either require more effort or things that will give them more leisure time. Like you said, people are hopefully, in theory, going to have more time to do the stuff that they really like outside of work and philosophize and all that. And so there are industries such as restaurants and, you know, just like general fun stuff. I can't think of the official name right now for the industry, but
hospitality.
Recreation. Not so much hospitality, but recreation. I mean, like people are still going to want to do escape rooms and theme parks and stuff like that. And so those are all sources of unskilled labor. And so people are still going to need people to cook for them. They're still going to need people to, you know, handle different tasks for them. And so I don't think it's going to be so much that there's not going to be work for unskilled labor. It's just that's going to look different. And in a way, I think that can actually be a plus, because being someone who started working by just scooping ice cream cones in high school, like it gets really, really boring really quickly. And so I think having that actual diversification in the unskilled labor force, as you would put it, is actually a really good thing, because it gives people more options, and that comes from people having more time to do stuff. And so I don't think it's a doomsday call for people who are just looking for a job to kind of get them by through whatever stage of life they're in.
It would lend itself to more meaningful opportunities.
Yeah, I would think so. Like more meaningful opportunities, and as well, it's not the first time we've had an economic shift. You think about the Industrial Revolution. Right now we're going through the technological or the digital revolution, however you want to call it. And so eventually I do think that those jobs are going to start to diminish more, but that's going to be a longer term effort. So, you know, within the next 10 years, I think we're just going to start to see that shift and that diversification in the employment. But over time, I think we are also, and we've already seen this trend, like statistics show that more people are going into college to get higher degrees of studying. There's more demand than ever for bachelor's degrees. And so we are moving generally in the long term towards a more educated society, and a society that's more qualified to work with these higher skilled jobs that are looking at areas that AI will not be able to cover. So I think it's just going to be a natural progression in that way. I
have some more grounded questions, but I do want to continue with the if yes when, because I have a couple more.
Go for it.
So artificial intelligence making, or at least guiding, policy decisions for governments.
You're just asking about like the actual legislation making process. So like, are we going to see robots passing laws and that kind of thing, right? Or
yeah, is it going to be, like, Wally says we should implement this new sort of progressive tax system, or because it would end up in, Y result.
Got you. Wally for climate change.
Wally for president.
Yeah. So in in that case, no, I don't think that's going to be a thing. And that it goes back to my previous answer where I mentioned I don't think AI will ever truly be able to replicate a human's complete thought process and all the nuances that go into areas that do require more of a human connection. So that applies a lot with law. And I'm not a lawyer by any means, so maybe I'm not so qualified to answer that aspect of it. So AI, where it would be involved is maybe showing different demographics. So it would be good for like political analysis, but I don't think it's going to be good for recommending legislation. I think that's something that people ultimately have to come up for themselves, because otherwise, like AI, as of now, I don't think has any legal autonomy. So why would you be, it's like if, it's going to sound ridiculous, but it's like if you were asking your toaster to make laws for you, you know, like, yes, AI can make some decisions, but they're very specialized decisions. And I don't think applying it to politics makes any sense, because AI is not going to be the one benefiting from it or suffering from it, on the vice versa. It's going to be people. And so politics is a very humanities-driven area, and I think it can benefit from consulting maybe from AI. But that's a purely just analytical standpoint. That's like for political analysis. That's not for actual legislation passing.
So there's a certain humanity that AI will always lack.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And I don't think it's going to be able to make mass decisions for people. And if you kind of go into a more philosophical stance, if you allow technology to do that, my first question is, why would you give up your autonomy to make those decisions? Like, because what else are you gonna do? You're gonna be letting something else decide for you, like what you are allowed to do or what you're not allowed to do, or what you do have a right to or what you don't have a right to. And so those are the kind of questions that crop up when you do try to implement something like that in politics, just on a general level. I'm not even talking on a detailed level. And so I don't think it's something that we will see, because it's just not, I don't think it will quite be so capable to do that, but also B, even if it was, I don't think it would be a good idea unless we really did want to go into some kind of like really crazy sci-fi version of the future, which if we have competent leaders, I don't think will happen.
Okay. Let's talk about specific professions and their viability in the future in an AI-fueled age.
Oh, I like that. All right.
I'm hesitant. Well, I'm not sure whether this should be, I just shoot out a profession and you go, yes, no, will be taken over by AI, and just keep rattling them off like a speed round, or well, we'll try it.
Okay.
Airplane pilot. Yes or no, will it be taken over by AI somewhat soon?
Somewhat soon, no.
Okay. Lawyer.
No.
Not even for some types of cases?
No, bro, have you seen like certain trials? They can get so messy.
Nurses.
Yes, to an extent.
Explain.
AI can, like I said, can provide good consulting services. So it can streamline the diagnostic process for a variety of things. Kind of like I mentioned with the Pier 17 project that I'm doing, there's people in my class who are doing very similar projects that are more specific to different diseases. But actually, one of the really critical points of feedback I got for it was, it goes back to that human aspect. With a lot of illnesses or a lot of diseases or disorders, it's not a black and white issue. There's a reason it takes a while for people to get diagnosed with some stuff, because sometimes you have to go see a psychologist to make sure that you're not actually suffering from a mental disorder that could be influencing, you know, the way that you're acting. Or sometimes you do have to go see a physical therapist to make sure that your mobility issues are not because of, you know, something going on in your muscles or anything like that. And so there's so many different specialists in those fields for a reason. So I think AI can provide tools to help discriminate between the details along certain steps, but it's not ever going to fully replace nurses, because they do have to build that relationship with the client, and then they also have to distinguish themselves based on their own best judgment and their own human knowledge, which again is something that can be replicated to an extent, but not completely with AI. They have to use that inventory of human knowledge to make their most educated decision as well.
Great answer. Two more, and then I promise we'll be done. The last one is incredibly random. Professor.
No. Well, yes to an extent, but no. So, yeah, you can have an AI give you feedback on assessments. But again, I feel like I'm kind of going in circles, but it comes back to that human connection. You're never going to replicate that with a machine. And I think we saw that a lot with Zoom learning and all these virtual platforms. There was a lot. And even on my end, like, I remember telling my parents I've never struggled with school so much because I could not stay focused or engaged if I was just interacting with Blackboard all the time or with Zoom all the time. And feedback is great for seeing how scores improve. But if you want to talk to an actual person who is going to tell you how they got into an industry or teach you certain aspects of a subject, an AI is not going to hold all of the answers for that. And it's not going to hold all of the human experience that comes with that has taught that person those things.
Little did you know, your professor was actually a deep fake.
Man, plot twist for me then.
Okay, last one, incredibly random. Basketball coach.
Basketball coach. I actually do think that one is a bit feasible. And I don't mean to come off as saying a contradiction with that because I know I just said some very valid stuff about professors. But sports coaching is actually, it's a bit different because it is very feedback based. So I think having a person there is still good for having like the morale boost and having someone who can cheer you on. Like, it would be really weird to have a machine just kind of monotonously going like, you're doing great, keep going, you know. But AI is able to, and it's stuff that is being implemented within the sports industry now, or at least being tested and developed. It's able to actually make a lot of really shocking predictions, and shocking because they're accurate, on player performance and being able to tackle certain weak points. And so I think if a player, like if the user interface is good enough, a player is able to actually get quite a bit out of AI. And the reason I say yes is because it would be a lot more effective with sports, since a lot of the times these are team-based, or there's already a social aspect kind of integrated into the activity of a sport, whereas learning in a classroom can be a lot more isolated. So in sports, I do think it is possible to see fully virtual coaches. When we get into more complex things like team management and stuff, I don't think we'll see that anytime soon. But for purely coaching, yeah, you could definitely have an AI coach.
Awesome.
Yeah, pretty sick.
I think that we're going to have to wrap up this conversation.
All right, sounds good.
Even though I think we could do this for hours.
No, absolutely. It's fascinating.
It was great to have you on the podcast.
It was great talking to you, Nick. Thank you so much again for having me.
Of course. Well, this was the Going to IEU podcast with Dyanna Rivera. Talked about AI, the implications within the school, and those philosophical. Until next time, bye.